Did the CIA poison a town in France? I'm Gabby, also known as Not Gabby B, and yeah, you heard that right. Today we're looking at the French town that had quote unquote cursed bread. The town in question is Pont Saint Esprit. See, I looked up pronunciations for it. There were 5 different ones, so this is the one that sounded kind of better. Anyway, so this is a little village on the Rhone River in southern France near Avignon. The event in question happened in August of 1951, and it is described by some as one of the most horrifying events of their lives, while it's described by others as mild or even a beautiful experience. And we'll get into that and why it varies so widely later on in this episode. So you might be wondering how one event can have such different descriptions. And guys, it is a doozy. Now, I'm going to be completely blunt and honest from the very beginning. I'm the first person to talk about the insane stuff the CIA did. However, this particular case is still officially unsolved, and the accusations against the CIA only surfaced in 2009 after an American journalist found some information that he claims links the CIA to the event. How true this is something that we will be exploring, as well as the other possible causes for this unfortunate event. So, in August of 1951, residents of Pont Saint Esprit started complaining of odd symptoms. The first reported cases started happening around August 15th, and over the next few days, hundreds more people started reporting similar symptoms. Initially, the symptoms seemed to be on par with food poisoning because the victims complained of nausea, stomach pain, low blood pressure, cold sweats, fevers, as well as what doctors in Pont Saint Esprit described as a disagreeable odor. And I'm not even joking. The doctor said they smelled. So, I don't know. Next time I go to the doctor, I'm going to be like, you know what I'm saying? But anyway, after the original symptoms died down, more symptoms developed in some individuals, such as insanity, hallucinations, loss of vision, insomnia, tremors of the extremities, and suicide attempts. With some individuals having hallucinations so violent that they had to be tied down. The thing is, according to reports at the time, ducks and dogs were also affected, with ducks marching like penguins and being unable to fly, and a dog that chewed on stones until it splintered all of its teeth and died. So all around, everyone was having a pretty terrible time. So some patients, they actually had positive experiences though. According to a New York Times article from September 8, 1968, the most common residual symptom was insomnia. But the people suffering from it, some of them had a good experience. They were cheerful, walking at night, while some had euphoric events where they heard heavenly choruses and they saw brilliant colors and wrote poetry. The thing is, the article doesn't make it 100% clear if the euphoric instances were linked to the violent hallucinations. And by that, I mean, if it came after, you know what I mean? Because you might go from like a high to a really low low. It was not 100% clear. But guys, these hallucinations were insanely violent. I'm going to go through some of these, and it's a doozy. So there was a little girl that thought she was being eaten by tigers, and there was a vineyard worker who thought the same thing, which led to him throwing things and smashing chairs to fight them off. He was subdued and tied to a bed with leather straps that he then chewed off and destroyed most of his teeth in the process. Another townsperson had the hallucination that he was performing in a circus, which led to him walking along the cable of a suspension bridge over the Rhone. A husband and wife, they chased each other with knives around their kitchen table, while the head of the farmers' cooperative filled hundreds of sheets of paper with carefully written poetry, and he couldn't stop because whenever he did, he had the urge to jump out the window. One man thought he was being chased by bandits with donkey ears, while another man tried to jump in the river because he thought his head was made of copper and he had snakes in his stomach that were burning him. Unfortunately, he was not the only man that thought he had snakes in his body, as there was another man that did jump out of a window because he thought red snakes were devouring his brain. There was another individual that jumped from a window as well, and even though he broke both of his legs, allegedly he got up and ran 5 more meters before collapsing again. So one especially sad story, though, was a mother that believed that her children had been slaughtered by a butcher and that he was going to make sausages out of them. An 11-year-old boy ended up trying to strangle his mother, while a grandmother threw herself against a wall and broke 3 ribs. I told you, this was a terrible time for every single person that had these violent hallucinations at least. So, a BBC News article from 2010 includes details of a first-hand event from the postman, Leon Amunir. So, at that point, he was 87 years old when he did the interview, and he was doing his deliveries on his bike when he was hit with hallucinations. He is quoted as saying, "It was terrible. I had the sensation of shrinking, and the fires and the serpents coiling around my arms." He says that he fell off his bike and was taken to a hospital in Avignon, where they put him in a straitjacket with 3 teenagers who had to be chained to their beds. He said, quote, "Some of my friends tried to get out of the window. They were thrashing wildly, screaming, and the sound of the metal beds and the jumping up and down, the noise was terrible. I'd prefer to die rather than go through that again." So the thing is, doctors had no idea what to make of it. A local doctor called the events an apocalyptic night, while the mayor is quoted as saying, "I have seen healthy men and women become terrorized, ripping their bedsheets, hiding themselves beneath their blankets to escape hallucinations." At the moment, doctors from all around, they had no idea what to do to treat this illness other than restrain the patients by any means necessary. This was due to the fact that they had no idea what would possibly cause something this intense to sweep over an entire town. By the end of the entire ordeal, approximately 300 people had been affected. 60 had been sent to psychiatric hospitals, with 5 people dying from causes related to the incident, and some others still reported hallucinations a month later. Now, what would possibly cause this entire thing to unfold? Was it the CIA, or was it something a little bit more innocent? I'll go with the explanation that most experts, including scientists, doctors, and historians, accept. In the immediate aftermath, the source of the madness was traced to bread. Roch Briand Bakery, the baker in charge, was said to have received a supply of gray flour, but the government strictly controlled flour distribution, so he had no way of replacing it. So what he did is he went ahead and used it in his baking that day. The thing is, the summer of 1951 was incredibly wet, which led to ergot growing in the rye fields. Prior to this, ergotism, which is the illness caused by ergot, had not been seen in France since the early 1800s. And even though it was common in the Middle Ages, they were like, yeah, it's pretty much gone at that point, you know? So what is ergot? According to Smithsonian Magazine, ergot is a parasitic fungus known as Claviceps purpurea. It grows in rye fields in very specific weather. So you need a cold winter followed by a really rainy growing season, which is exactly what they had. It is shown as an oversized violet grain protruding from the head of a plant that has been affected. Society, especially like European societies, have been really affected by this for centuries. So the cause of ergotism, though, was only identified in 1695, even though it was around for much longer. Like some people said Pliny the Elder was writing about ergotism. So it was just a lot harder to identify back then because even though it did affect entire families, it wasn't contagious. It appears on wheat, on rye, on barley, and on oats. And what ergot does is it replaces the grain with sclerotium, which is a fungal body. Claviceps purpurea can be carried in the wind, basically like a dandelion. So it'll be carried in the wind to a plant, and then once it's on there, it produces a slime that then attracts insects to help it spread to even more plants. So it is streamlined. And then if this grain is used to make any sort of food, it leads to ergotism. And ergotism is also known as St. Anthony's fire or the devil's curse. I think it's well named. The thing about ergotism, though, is that it could also lead to a gangrenous form of the illness, which can lead to loss of fingers or toes or entire limbs due to the blood vessel constriction that comes from the illness. This gangrenous ergotism has been found in France and countries west of the Rhine River, while countries east of the Rhine have more convulsive ergotism. North America and Britain also tend to have gangrenous ergotism too, and we'll get into why the types of ergotism vary so greatly. Basically, any form of the varied symptoms that may appear in people affected come from the composition and concentration of alkaloids present in the crop. And this is because ergot has many poisonous fungal metabolites. According to the American Society for Microbiology, the metabolites in ergot contain nitrogen atoms that designate them as alkaloids, and they are produced from a 14-gene ergot-alkaloid synthesis cluster on the C. purpurea genome. The alkaloid production, however, is heavily influenced by the soil composition where the rye is planted, which means that the alkaloids can vary widely based on location. So you can see depending on like dampness, minerals in the soil, you might end up with a type of ergot that no one's ever seen before, which is not comforting in the least. So the symptoms of ergotism, they seem to come from ergo-alkaloid activation of various hormone receptors, such as the ones for serotonin, dopamine, and epinephrine. In gangrenous ergotism, the smooth muscles that line various internal organs, they contract and they slow blood flow, and that leads to oxygen deprivation, which leads to tissue death in extremities and gangrene. But yeah, back to the ergot outbreak. In France, between 900 AD and 1300 AD, outbreaks of ergot killed 20,000 to 50,000 people. And Julius Caesar lost many, many, many soldiers to ergot in his campaigns in Gaul. Many historians also believe that the burnings at the stake of witches in Europe and Salem may have come from ergot poisoning outbreaks. Basically, ergot was around for such a long time and potentially had very significant historical impacts. So was ergot the cause of this event in Pont Saint Esprit? And if so, how the hell would the CIA even become involved? Well, I thought you'd never ask. I'm going to use the BBC to really explain this because they seem to have the least sensationalized article on it. Up until 2009, everyone basically assumed that it was ergot that affected this village. That is until an American investigative journalist named Hank Albarelli said he found a CIA document that points to the event being driven by a CIA LSD test. The document was labeled, and this is going to be like exactly word for word, like in parentheses. So we're starting parentheses, RE, Pont Saint Esprit, and F. Olsen files. SO span/France operation file, inclusive Olsen.intel files, hand carry to Berlin - tell him to see to it that these are buried, close parentheses. And Dakota, if you can just put that all up on the screen so they can see, this is what we're basing all of this on. So the BBC breaks down the document title, like bit by bit, right? So F. Olsen is Frank Olsen, a CIA scientist who at the time of the incident was doing research on LSD for the CIA. Bellin, when it says hand carry to Bellin, was David Bellin, an executive director of the Rockefeller Commission created by the White House in 1975 to investigate shady things the CIA was doing around the world. The entire case for it being a CIA operation is that Albarelli believes that if the documents had not been buried, they would have shown the CIA was experimenting on the townspeople by giving them LSD. Albarelli believes that LSD was put in the bread. Albarelli also said that he found a top secret report from Edgewood Arsenal that said that the army had to do everything possible to launch field experiments with LSD. Albarelli also got hold of another 1954 CIA report where a CIA agent reported his conversation with a representative of the Sandoz company in Switzerland. The important thing to note in this is that Sandoz base was relatively close, and by relatively close, I mean a few hundred kilometers to Pont Saint Esprit, and it was the only place where LSD was being produced at the time. The agent reported that after several drinks, the Sandoz rep abruptly stated, quote, "The Pont Saint Esprit secret was that it was not bread at all. It was not green ergot." The official claimed that the illness was caused by diethylamide, which is what the D stands for in LSD, which means it's not LSD, it's another compound, and it doesn't have any hallucinogenic properties. Like you'd need the whole LS and D, you know? So obviously, outside of these documents that were found by the journalist, there hasn't been any official release files with anything regarding ergotism. Stephen Kaplan, a Cornell historian, has actually written a book on the Pont Saint Esprit incident, and he believes that it's neither ergotism or LSD, which I don't even have time to go into that, but I would check out that book if I were you. His arguments for the LSD claim being, quote, clinically incoherent are that LSD usually takes effect in a few hours, but the inhabitants of the town only experience symptoms after 24 to 36 hours, which I mean is a fair point. In addition, LSD doesn't cause the level of digestive distress that the townspeople had initially. In addition, at the time of the incident, the technology to disperse LSD through the air was not yet available, and they would have had to get the baker to bake the LSD into the bread, which sounds a lot like really complex. But again, the entire theory is a conspiracy theory, and it doesn't have any solid evidence. There were rumors in a Telegraph article that said that the French intelligence agencies were looking into the CIA, but then those intelligence agencies denied this. Ultimately, many scientists and historians pointed out the flaws in the theory that it was the CIA, starting with the chemistry behind the exact named compound in the conversation transcript, as well as the potential method of dispersal of the alleged LSD. The thing is, LSD is actually derived from ergot. It was discovered by Dr. Albert Hofmann in 1943, and it gained popularity in the 1950s and 60s, and it was the basis for many experiments that focused on the psychedelic experience that it provided. LSD affects your senses, thoughts, and mood, and it can cause a wide array of mental states based on your mental state at the time. It causes pseudo-hallucinations, because people typically know that what they're seeing isn't real, instead of a true hallucination where people think that what they're seeing is real. In addition, the consistency of the trip varies. Some people have a great experience one time and then a terrible one the next time because it's highly unpredictable. The physical effects of LSD are numbness, rapid heartbeat, chills, nausea, weakness, shakiness, and altered sensations of gravity. LSD can cause panic and paranoia, and this can lead people to flee from whatever they're hallucinating. So as you can see, some of the effects of LSD actually overlap with the effects of ergotism, which makes sense. However, again, I have to reiterate, there is no solid proof. And while I'm the first person to call out the CIA on their insanity, in this particular instance, no one really knows for sure. And unless someone somewhere finds some insane evidence, the unfortunate reality is we may never actually know what happened in that small village back in 1951. And that's the story, you guys. Like, I looked and there is just not enough proof to be like, yeah, they definitely did this. Like, I'm not saying they didn't do it, but I'm not going to say they did it. I'm just saying nobody really knows, you know? And I don't even know if an investigation would pop up with enough information because it was in 1951, you know? It's just really unfortunate. Really unfortunate. But thank you guys for watching. I'll see you next time. Let me know what you want me to cover next. I know there was some other towns that are affected by LSD, so I'm gonna look into it. I just wanted to look into specifically this one. Also, I'm working on the Church of the Subgenius cult. I don't know. I looked into a little bit into it yesterday, so that will be a video coming up very soon. But yeah, thanks for watching. Bye, guys.